Good afternoon. Good afternoon. All right. I am here to close out the day. I heard it was going to be stellar. We'll see what we can do. But I think that I have the benefit of closing out the day. How many of you have ever met anyone who won the lottery? You have today. Okay. Now, Stephen Murray is the president and CEO of the Virginia Economic Development Partnership. He is the architect of the proposal and the strategy that actually got Amazon to choose Virginia for HQ2. So a little more skill than luck, but still the lottery, right? There's a bunch that we want to talk about. I think there's definite lessons learned both from your history and the work you just did to bring Amazon to Virginia. But it'd be great to give people a sense of the competition itself, some of the strategies you saw others pursue, and why you decided to pursue the strategy you did.
Sure. Well, first of all, great to be here at Brookings. When we got the RFP back in September of 2017, what was obvious to us and I guess everyone else in the world was that it was the biggest economic development opportunity in history, at least from a private sector competitive project orientation. And it was just an enormous opportunity. And we had a sense very quickly that many other metro areas, as it turned out about 237 others, were going to put forward their best case for this, not just in terms of how they told the story, but the kinds of economic offers that they would make to the company. If you don't know Virginia, we're a state that is fiscally very conservative, and I knew early on that we were going to see some other states make some really enormous offers for the project from an incentives perspective that we just politically was not going to work in Virginia. And additionally, we had many high-quality tech firms already there, so we didn't want them to feel like they were playing second fiddle. So what we decided to do was to certainly offer a competitive incentive offer, but to really lead with what I think Marcella Escobar would call a capabilities-based approach. And ultimately, the centerpiece of our package, which most people actually don't know, even to this day, is an enormous investment in our tech talent pipeline. Roughly $1.1 billion of new state investment in our public colleges and universities across Virginia, as well as K-12 and our community colleges to really more than double the pipeline of graduates in computer science and related fields. That was really the centerpiece of our package, and as far as we know, vastly bigger investment in that space than any other location. We also thought about what are the things that we need to do as a region to really position not just Amazon to be successful, but other companies as well. And so there were large investments in affordable housing, hundreds of millions of dollars invested in multimodal infrastructure projects as well. We certainly didn't know, we didn't know at the beginning how competitive we would be. Clearly, if they were going to choose locations based on the size of the offers, we were not going to win that competition. But ultimately, it worked. And what we're especially excited about is that the investments that we're making in higher education are not just going to benefit Amazon, they're going to benefit thousands of tech companies across the Commonwealth.
So how did you come to learn that the talent piece was actually the piece that was a big driver for them? And what did they say about it?
I had been involved in economic development, I guess about 15 years at that point, and had worked with many tech companies. And for approximately 99% of tech firms, the number one thing by far is talent. I mean, that is the biggest thing. There are probably a few other things that matter, but they relate to that. So we had a feeling that would be the biggest factor. We also had a couple conversations with them early on, and I think they even articulated it in the RFP itself, that they were especially concerned about occupations like software development engineering, machine learning, artificial intelligence, UI UX design. We also knew coming out of our own strategic planning process that those were areas that we were already growing in, that we wanted to grow more, and that the biggest enabler or constraint of our growth would really be that tech talent pipeline. So that this was really an opportunity to not only meet Amazon's needs, but to better enable the growth of our entire tech sector. But they talked about it. We knew from many other companies we had talked to, we already had a gap in talent, in tech talent in particular, like basically the whole world, and we needed to do something to address that as well as to create a better environment for them.
Now you were balancing this desire to actually create assets that would be valuable to your entire community, but at the same time you did some really specific tailoring to the needs of Amazon. You want to talk a little bit about the homework you did to try and figure out how to do that?
Yeah, one of the interesting things we really took advantage of was social media data. So we actually analyzed, Amazon had told us that the best proxy for HQ2 in terms of the mix of jobs and occupations would be, in fact, their existing headquarters in Seattle. That still is, by the way, their expectation. And so we analyzed substantially all of the LinkedIn profiles of HQ1, the Seattle workforce. And what we found there is if you've got roughly half the jobs that are sort of typical headquarters jobs, marketing, HR, accounting, and so forth, finance, and half really those tech occupations. And if you look at the tech occupations, that was the space they were the most concerned about. Literally half of all people at Amazon Seattle headquarters that are working in some kind of tech occupation, half of them have at least one degree in computer science. So that was a really big data point for us, and that really shaped a lot of how we built our package. In fact, if you look at the U.S. as a whole, and you look at jobs like software development engineering, like computer programming, 40 to 50% of all the folks in those positions have a degree in computer science, and everything else is low single digits after maybe computer engineering. So that really helped shape that strategy, and we felt like that would be successful. We were also, of course, interviewing many of our other existing tech companies, particularly those here in the DC metro area, and they were talking about a need for that same kind of talent also.
Got it. Now, we've been talking about the work that you did in Virginia and the strategy that you used, but you mentioned before you've been in it for 15 years. You had a couple of dry runs at this, one in particular, Louisiana. You want to talk about that prior experience and what you brought with you?
Yeah, I was actually reflecting on many years ago, or not that many years ago, I was Secretary of Economic Development in Louisiana. You all heard today about a really important and fascinating new piece of research that Marcel and others at Brookings have put out, and it made me think a lot about the work that I did there. And a lot of it was about how do you take the capabilities that you currently have and develop sort of into adjacent industry sectors, and what are the things that you need to do to build that? Well, when I was in Louisiana, we realized that our traditional growth engines of the Louisiana economy were not going to be the growth engines of the future. Almost all of them were expected to experience either sluggish or negative growth, petrochem industry and so forth. And so we had this aspiration to really get into the tech sector in a meaningful way. It was a little bit of an audacious goal at the time. And in talking with many of the tech companies, again, talent. So we had come up with this idea of how do we sort of combine incentives that could sort of help reduce the risk and the cost of getting started with these significant investments in higher education programs that are relevant to those companies. We initially, I think, did it for IBM in Baton Rouge. We made I think it was a $15 million investment in LSU. And then right after that, back-to-back, CGI, GE Capital, another IBM center, CSC, all did basically the same thing. And in every case, we made a significant investment in basically computer science programs in the nearby universities. The companies loved it, the communities loved it, the public officials loved it. Incidentally, one of the things that enabled our success, so that was in fact a pilot or a prototype, if you will, and we looked at could we do this on a much bigger scale in Virginia, and obviously that worked well. The other thing that was really great about how this worked out is if you think about college graduates, they're highly mobile, right? Really, there's very little connection between where they get their education and where they end up working, even at the state level. And so we realized, hey, if we do this, we could do this not just in Northern Virginia, we could actually do this statewide and really benefit all the tech companies across the Commonwealth. So one of the things that really gave us, I think, a much better acceptance of the project when it was announced compared to New York. There were many reasons it was different, but one of the reasons was there were significant benefits for higher education across Virginia and for all the tech employers across Virginia as well. But we learned a lot. We learned a lot in those Louisiana experiences that really we were able to draw from in our HQ2 bid.
So two quick things. One is now that you did the statewide play, you got a $1.1 billion investment in higher education in the state. Have you heard about other states that were kind of planning to do that if they got Amazon, and now that they didn't get it, they still think it's a good idea?
Yeah, we're not aware of any that did it at that scale. I think many places a large number of places included some kind of workforce development or higher education component, but all the ones that we've seen were, at least an order of magnitude smaller. I don't think anyone did something quite this ambitious. Candidly, I don't think we would have been comfortable doing something that ambitious had I not sort of had an opportunity to experiment a little bit with it before. We were also very, very fortunate that a number of our university leaders and our state higher education board got involved early on and really helped us to build out that model. In fact, one of the most encouraging things in the whole process was when we were down to the last few weeks. So we didn't know if we were going to win, but we were pretty sure we were in the top 5 or so. Our state leaders said, you know what, if we don't win this, we should do this anyway. All right. By the way, actually funny, another story hasn't been told. The whole Tech Talent Pipeline Initiative and the idea of this innovation campus in Northern Virginia was actually, these are 2 ideas that have been fleshed out in our strategic plan that we were wrapping up when we got the Amazon RFP. And I remember going to our board, and I think everybody thought, there's no way we're going to get hundreds of millions of dollars to do this, right? And then all of a sudden, we've got this new source of billions of dollars in state tax revenue, and it really helped to get it done.
What do they say? Luck is when preparation meets opportunity?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
No question, a combination of those things.
Did you take a hard look at the regional benefits?
We did. I mean, I mentioned we were working on our strategic plan. There were 2 big themes that came out of that. When you look at Virginia, the biggest sort of long-term economic driver of Virginia's growth has been its connection to the federal government, huge source, not just of direct government jobs, but the federal defense contractors and so forth as well. But the challenge that comes along with that is we were much too concentrated in the federal government as a sector. Secondly, we had realized that our biggest traded sector growth opportunity for the Commonwealth was tech, broadly defined, software development, cybersecurity, data centers, and so forth. And that the biggest constraint or enable that growth would be the tech talent pipeline. So when we got this Amazon RFP, we literally were in the final week or 2 of wrapping up this strategic plan and realized that all of this could kind of work together in a really synergistic way. So we looked at regional benefits, we looked at the impact on direct jobs, we looked at indirect jobs, we looked at the experience in Seattle in terms of the catalyst that Amazon has been for venture capital, for sort of spin-off companies that have come out of Amazon as a result of that. We looked also, of course, at where are people actually going to live. All the benefit wouldn't necessarily come to Virginia. A lot of the folks are going to live in D.C. and Maryland, so there are some regional benefits from that perspective. And the thing that we really put the most energy into, other than the tech talent pipeline, was the multimodal transportation infrastructure. And we had help from our local, regional, and state partners really model out the sites and identify what are the additional infrastructure investments that are needed to make this work. So there's 2 new metro entrances. There's a new really cool pedestrian bridge that's going to go to Reagan Airport, and some other things that we were able to build in on top of the existing $15 billion worth of planned multimodal projects in the region already underway.
It's almost like he took a systemic view of it, thinking about both the individuals and the economic environment and the built environment around them. Like, you guys don't remember the beginning of the day? Anyway, sounds brilliant. Let's talk about the folks who are locked outside of the economic pathways today, and whether or not they would have wound up in low-wage jobs, or whether they're going to have the skills for the kind of jobs that Amazon. Are you creating new pathways for people who would not have had opportunity at all? Are these people who are going to get upgraded jobs? Like, what's the source, and what are going to be the benefits to the folks that participate?
First of all, I think bear in mind, one of the reasons we were motivated to do this is that the DC metro economy, particularly at the time that this was happening in late 2017, it had 5 years of really significant underperformance. So you had not just a lack of inclusive growth, but a lack of growth, in general compared to our peers around the country. This is going to be a big catalyst for improving that. As we put the Tech Talent Pipeline Initiative together, certainly most of the investment is going at the 4-year level, but we do have significant new investments in K-12. And we're one of the first states in the country that has a computer science incorporated as part of the required standards of learning in the K-12 environment. We're roughly quadrupling the state investment we're making in the existing state investment in professional development and online curricula that will support those folks. As everybody I think in this room knows, if we want more folks to go into tech, post-secondary is just one piece, but if kids don't finish high school with the basic skill sets and some sense that may be something they're interested in, very hard to get more folks to go that way. So that's another factor. At the community college level, we've seen a great partnership between Northern Virginia Community College and George Mason in this region. They're creating new programs that will be terminal degree or certificate opportunities at the sub-baccalaureate level that will also feed into not just Amazon, but these other tech companies as well. So there's a lot more that needs to be done. And certainly we are a bit, you could argue we're a little overweighted on bachelor's and above, but that's just because so much of the demand is there right now. But we are looking at ways to build the K-12 pipeline as well. There's also new funding for internships at the post-secondary level to help students get into those career pathways.
Is there anything that was surprising to you about the challenges of getting the systems and the employers in particular? You kind of got the employer input and took it to them. Was there anything surprising about how easy or hard it was to get the systems to begin to line up with what employers actually want?
It's a great question. One of the things that everybody in this room either should know this or already does know this, right? One of the ironic things about, we talk about the importance of higher education to the labor market and to business, but like the vast majority of all the money that's invested in higher education is not targeted in any way whatsoever. I mean, zero, right? So particularly at the four-year level. In fact, one of the reasons that our institutions are not more responsive to the market demand is that very often the programs that are most needed, that are the most sort of undersupplied, if you will, are higher cost programs. So the institutions need some way to deal with that incremental cost, right? A lot of what we're doing with this Tech Talent Initiative is we're funding them at a higher cost per student to account for the higher cost of faculty, the higher cost of startup packages and all that. So the institutions, I think once they realized that we were going to give them a way in their sort of fiscal setup to be able to actually deliver, they were very enthusiastic. But when you look across the country, I mean, I don't know the exact percentages, but I think it's certainly fair to say that the vast majority of states do not have funding models that reflect the different costs of different types of programs. So a lot of the misalignment that is happening is simply presidents of community colleges and universities that are having to meet their budgets, right? And so if you don't have the money to be able to afford the higher cost program, you're not going to deliver it. We found that when we talked about bringing real resources to the table, across the board, they were super responsive to that. We're actually going through the process right now of negotiating MOUs with each institution that'll lay out their specific participation in this. This is going to be a performance-based program, but we are providing dollars for new faculty lines.
Say more about that.
Yeah, so one of the things that's very important to the General Assembly, the legislature in Virginia, was that if we're targeting this outcome of roughly doubling the number of grads per year, it'll be another, give or take, about 30,000 additional bachelor's and master's grads in computer science related fields over the next 2 decades, in excess of what we're currently on track to produce. They wanted to make sure we would actually get those outcomes. So we're actually going through a competitive process right now where all of our, I should say the vast majority of our four-year public colleges and universities, as well as our community college system, have proposed the level at which they would like to participate in this program. We've kind of got a standard way by which they can lay out, we need this many new faculty lines, startup packages, et cetera. And we will ultimately negotiate an agreement with each institution. Initially, they'll be funded based on the projected, cost. And then once, 4 years later, once we start getting incremental growth in graduates, the sustaining funds would be based on their actual performance. It's certainly been done before, but I don't think it's been done before at that scale.
Got it. And jumping around just a little bit, do you expect, based on what we've talked about in terms of the new pathways that you created even down to secondary school, that there's going to be a shift in the demographics of those participating in these pathways?
I think so. One of the things it's funny, when we actually included our pitch to Amazon, it hasn't been talked a lot about publicly, but one of the things Amazon was really interested in was inclusion. And we talked about how the tech talent in Northern Virginia, the DC Metro, is vastly more diverse than in Silicon Valley. I forget the numbers off the top of my head, but far, far greater diversity. It's also a place that Raj Chetty has looked at as one of the best enablers of economic mobility. When you look at Northern Virginia, those localities like Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax, Loudoun, and so forth, at least the average across them, among the best economic mobility drivers in the country. And a lot of that has to do with having great public education options at both the K through 12 level, and beyond.
On the same note, affordability is one of the big barriers to access in general. Did you guys look at any innovative strategies for financial aid, financial access, other forms of access?
We did. Now, bear in mind, we had to put this all together in 6 weeks from, full stop. But
You seem like you got everything else in there.
and by the way, the deal that we actually ultimately executed was almost identical to what we put together in our round one proposal. The only thing we changed was we essentially cut the incentives roughly in half, when the number of jobs went down. But in working with our universities, one of the things that they are committed to is to trying to attract a diverse group of students into these programs. So we're going through the proposals right now, but I know, for example, Virginia Tech has laid out a significant amount of the new dollars are going to go to financial aid to ensure that they can get a higher level of diversity in computer science and related fields than they historically have had. I can't say that'll be the case across the board, but certainly I think many of our schools are going to be targeting that as part of their package.
Are there any experimentation with things like income sharing agreements or things like that that might open up the window?
I personally think that's really interesting. I don't believe any of the universities have included that as part of their proposal, though.
All right, sorry, I was just curious. So you now have a framework in place for all the colleges. You're going to have Amazon, in a couple of years really starting to drive the demand. But you have all these other employers
Yes.
that have been kind of waiting for the opportunity to piggyback on what you've got so far. What is the concern and what is the opportunity that the existing employers currently feel about the deal that you cut?
No, that's a great question. So when we were putting sort of the fine points on this about a year ago, getting ready for Amazon's sort of round one visit when we got down to the 20, we interviewed many of our tech employers in Northern Virginia, from large companies down to startups. We posed many questions to them, but one of the most interesting ones was, for me at least, was what would it mean for your company if HQ2 came to Northern Virginia? And so many of folks were worried they were going to be concerned about it. But the dominant perspective was it will be more competition certainly in the short run, but in the long run we're going to have a bigger, more vibrant, more diverse tech talent market. Right. I remember back when I was in Louisiana, I used to go to Silicon Valley once or twice a year trying to recruit companies to move out of that, quote, bad business climate in California. And how many executives did I have tell me, I'd move my company tomorrow if I could get all these people to follow me, right? I mean, if you have the talent, you've got everything in the tech talent space.
Got it. I've asked you about a couple of surprises in the process. Is there something that happened during the process that no one ever asked about and you're surprised?
That I was surprised they didn't ask about? Yeah. Gosh, that's such a good question. It's kind of a blur looking back on it. I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the models that you heard about.
I will say there's actually one thing that's really important. And Brookings has directly and indirectly written a lot about this through the Brookings Metro program. The thing that we were actually the most worried about from beginning, I would say all the way up until a couple days before the announcement, was cost, right? If you look, one of Amazon's leadership principles is frugality, right? And when you rack and stack all the metros across the country, we were less expensive than New York, maybe in Silicon Valley, but higher than almost everybody else. And it turns out that if you have a big metro with a high level of educational attainment, and this area is off the charts, among the very highest in the country, that the productivity and the innovation capacity is so great that it basically offsets that sort of nominal high cost of labor and of real estate and so forth. That was something we were worried about the whole way. I was hoping that many of you have read this great book, The New Geography of Jobs by Enrico Moretti. Early last year, I was visiting with a senior executive of Amazon who will go unnamed, but let's say a very senior executive, not Bezos, but someone who works closely with him. And this person said, I'd asked him, what do you think of the tech talent in the Northern Virginia, DC metro area? The meeting was not about Amazon. It wasn't about HQ2. We weren't supposed to talk about HQ2, but I asked him this question. And I felt like we were in the right direction when he said, well, I'll answer your question, but I don't know if you've ever heard of this book, The New Geography of Jobs. He said, our senior team has read this book, and it's influenced how we think about where talent is developed, how we develop talent. And a big theme of that book by Enrico Moretti was really about sort of these magical properties of metro areas, and that when you put together, large numbers of highly educated people, all these really cool things happen. And that was probably the first time that I thought, okay, we may be able to overcome that cost issue at the end of the day.
Awesome. So I'm going to push you on that one because my next question is, a lot of our conversation today has been about the communities that are kind of left behind in these conversations because they don't benefit from those agglomeration effects. Is there any part of the proposal that's about, you talked about how the drawing in of the universities across the state will benefit other companies. Are there any thoughts about distributed workforce and things like that that are going to be a part of the Amazon plan and that might benefit these communities that normally might be left out?
Yeah, it's not part of the Amazon plan explicitly in the sense that, their commitment is to create a certain amount of jobs, here in Northern Virginia and Arlington. But one of our initiatives at VDP in Virginia is to cultivate what we loosely call rural and small metro technology centers. Certainly most of the tech gravity in the country is going to the quote superstar cities, but there's a lot of tech jobs in smaller metros and even in some rural areas. You look at companies like SAIC, like CGI, IBM to an extent, Pillar, for example, that are doing some interesting things. And so we really saw this tech talent initiative, because we're going to do it all across the state, as a way to build the pipeline of talent that we would need to attract more tech jobs to these smaller communities. The other thing that came out of it, while it was not specifically part of our HQ2 pitch, clearly one of the biggest challenges facing rural America is a lack of digital connectivity, a lack of broadband access. And that had been percolating in Virginia for a number of years. It was in our strategic plan as a top priority. But I think one of the things that happened, I personally believe, as a result of Amazon, or at least largely sparked by Amazon, was that the rural and smaller metro parts of the state were kind of saying, hey, this is great for Northern Virginia, but broadband access will really help us in the other parts of Virginia. And we were big cheerleaders for that. And with the governor's leadership and the General Assembly support, I think they roughly quadrupled the amount of dollars that are going into broadband deployment, basically to help subsidize service in areas that otherwise would not get service or wouldn't get it for a long time. And we now can talk about, for the first time in Virginia, being on a path toward ubiquitous broadband access over the next 7 to 10 years. And that I think was a partial outcome, again, not explicitly tied to it, but I think something that was really sparked in some ways by it.
Now, you talked about there coming a point in the process, though, where, talk is cheap, but people were like, even if we don't get Amazon, we should just keep going.
Yeah.
Is there something in particular that was a trigger that got people to kind of open their eyes and said, Amazon's nice, but our future might actually depend on this?
Yeah, no, we did a lot of work on looking at supply and demand for tech talent. We did a lot of work in interviewing many of our top tech employers. And so as we were getting close to the finish line and really digging in with our state leaders to make sure that they were all going to be comfortable if we ultimately got this, I think there's just a broad recognition that this is the single most important thing that we can do economically to position Virginia for growth, is to really invest in this tech talent pipeline. Certainly many other things matter, but this was for us really a constraint, at that point in time. And it was really something that came from them. I remember as we were talking about it, it's probably the last or second to last briefing that we had with our legislative leaders, where it sort of came up that someone just sort of mentioned it, one of the legislative leaders, and there was an apparent consensus in the room that if we don't get this, we should make these investments anyway. These are things probably that there's so many things we could all talk about every state should do them. It's like eating your vegetables, right? But until you have that moment that creates the sense of urgency, it's just hard to get people rallied around it. Okay. And by the way, I give Amazon great credit for that, because just in our case, and maybe indirectly, the things that we felt like we needed to do to be successful in getting that project were things that largely we really needed to do anyway. That was really huge for us. And then also their emphasis on regional collaboration, their concern about affordable housing, their concern about infrastructure. It really helped. Last year, Virginia, for the first time, or not for the first time, but recently, Virginia, D.C., Maryland came together to solve the metro financing problem. Again, not just because of Amazon, but it was a great catalyst to get everybody motivated at the time. It helped.
We've been waiting a long time.
Yeah.
Sorry, for those of you who don't know, I'm like born and raised here. You've been fantastic, but I've been counting you on and we were like at 20. So this is going to be my last question. Now that the Amazon card is played and you've got this infrastructure in place and you heard the kind of tools that Marcella has created, what do you think the right next play is for you guys?
Well, one of our great aspirations is to position every region of Virginia to grow. They're not all going to grow at the same rate, obviously, but positioning every region to grow. And that's why I think the new research out today on the Economic Complexity Index and looking at ways to leverage a capabilities-based economic development strategy and do it in a really thoughtful way, I think you're going to be seeing us do a number of things in that direction.
Fantastic. Well, Stephen, first of all, I wanted to say thank you for your time on the panel, but as a person who is born and raised in this region, I want to thank you for the job that you did to get Amazon to come to town.
With 500 other people, by the way. It was a big team.
Absolutely, absolutely. And with that, I'd ask everyone to say thank you very much.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.